Broadcasting. All right, we are broadcasting. We are live. Hello, everyone. My name is Rob Catalano with WorkTango. I looked up and there was 4 people. I looked up again and there's 30. So what we're going to do is, as people get filtered in to the webinar, wow, 43. What we'll do is we'll just give everyone a minute to get organized and get connected, whether it's through their computer or calling in from a phone. So we will get things started in about another 45 seconds. So just hang tight. We have some wonderful reading for you here in terms of some of the things you could take a look at while you wait. I guess, Carolyn, to fit in some of the time, I learned something really new today that you shared with me. So we were talking earlier about how I was feeling a little under the weather, and so was my colleague Stephen that's also on the call. And you had some interesting insight that I thought everyone else should hear.
Yeah, well, the third week in September is when we collectively see the most admissions to ERs with asthma-related illness. It's a worldwide phenomenon. It's happened for years, and I learned that during my old pharma days. Yeah.
And I was saying it's probably because all the kids are back to school bringing home germs that was, not seen for a couple of months, but it sounded like it was more of a global phenomenon thing than just Canada.
But that is definitely one of the theories. So I don't know if more research, I'm sure they continue to do research on it. That was definitely one of the theories, was that little petri dish at school.
Yeah, sounds good.
Yeah.
All right, well, looks like since we've been kind of buying some time here, the amount of attendees have doubled, and appreciate everyone's time in joining us today at the WorkTango Webinar series, and really excited to talk about the topic today, happy employees, happy customers, and how purposeful workplace experiences create inspired and empowered teams that are not just empowered, but they drive results at the end of the day. We were just giving everyone a minute to get connected, and a couple of things kind of housekeeping wise I wanted to share. First things is the slides and the webinar recording will be emailed to everyone, within 24 hours. You'll get a sense of what the ability to download them or access them later. And then another second point there, really important for making this really a conversation and really valuable for everyone involved, is that if you have any questions, we please ask that you type it in the Q&A section of Zoom. So in the tool we're using called Zoom, in the little bar there, you'll see a Q&A section, and we want you to ask questions. This is meant to be interactive. I have permission to interrupt Carolyn whenever I want. We can look at, I'll be monitoring those and trying to ask them in a timely manner, again, to make it more of a conversation. So it's encouraged, and we want everyone to participate. Now, the other thing too is if you have any other comments, like you're having issues with the audio or getting connected, there is a chat function, and my colleague Stephen, who you can't see on the call, but he's here, will be helping anyone on that end as well. So just a reminder, if you have any questions, please in the Q&A, anything on the chat side, put it there and we'll help you out as well. So that being said, now that we got, we're almost at 100 here on the webinar, we'll get started. And what I wanted to do was first just introduce, the both of us from a speaker standpoint. My name is Rob Catalano. I'm the Chief Engagement Officer at a company called WorkTango. I've been kind of involved with putting on these types of webinars, even other events, globally around really just building the community from an HR and leadership perspective. And what I always try and do is bring in other experts, other lenses, other schools of thought to really build that community so that we can, again, look at something from a different lens and, inspire us to do something different in our workplace based on some of our goals from a people practice and leadership standpoint. So, in my time in doing all of that and in that community, I ended up running into Carolyn, who's on a mission apparently. But Carolyn does a lot of wonderful things, which she'll talk a little bit about. We actually worked directly with Carolyn on establishing our values at WorkTango, and we're just really enamored in terms of what Carolyn is doing for other organizations out there around the concepts that we'll be talking about in today's webinar topic. I'm not going to, do much of the speaking today. It's really going to be Carolyn's show. But as I mentioned, I will be able to interrupt her at any time with your questions. So before handing it over to our speaker, and again, thanks again, Carolyn, for being involved today, I did want to share one kind of preamble going into this concept of purpose. And that preamble is this slide here. And you probably might notice and see it on my video here and on my t-shirt, but the history of WorkTango is that, I'm one of the co-founders of the organization. And when we were starting the company, we basically wanted to align what the future of the organization was to be with something that was really purposeful at the end of the day. And what we did is we actually came up with not a mission statement, because we actually believe missions end, right? You get to the end of a mission and you're done. And we created what we actually called our passion statement. And it was this that you're seeing on the screen. We believe that since people spend, most of their waking hours at work, it was something that was a big part of people's lives. But holistically, we wanted to do something to improve work lives. And you might think, well, it's just a passion statement. What impact does that have in the organization? But when we're going through our recruiting process, when we're establishing decisions we make on our product or who we partner with, we're always looking at it through this lens. When people's eyes light up about this concept, that's when we want to hire them. That's when we want to interact with them. And it's very similar in why Carolyn, when we met, we had a very similar view. So I always like kind of, that story to establish kind of, what we did and why I believe it's so important. And, I know there's gonna be a lot of great insight around building that purposeful workplace from Carolyn today. So Carolyn, the floor is yours. Take it away.
All right, thanks, Rob. I remember a few years ago when I reached out to you and said, hey, can you have a copy of my book? Will you read it? So I'm really happy today to be talking about purposeful workplace experiences and how they can create results within your organization, but more importantly, how they can inspire and empower the teams that you work within. So to get started though, I want to make this personal for us. I want you to think about the biggest challenge in your life that you've had to overcome. So, it could be something like buying a house. I know if any of you are in Toronto or Vancouver, buying a house is a pretty big challenge. And maybe you've had to go through a bankruptcy, you've had to overcome that. Maybe you've gone through a divorce, maybe you're starting a business, but just think about what that challenge is that you have overcome. Maybe if you want to even type it into the Q&A box. Well, I'll tell you about my challenge, my biggest personal challenge, because it was the impetus behind me writing my book and creating this idea of purposeful workplace experiences. So my challenge happened when I was 31 years old. I was newly married, 6 months pregnant. I was working in the pharmaceutical industry. I had big plans to climb up that corporate ladder. And boom, my husband got diagnosed with stage 4 renal cell carcinoma. So stage 4 kidney cancer. And no one used the word terminal directly at that time, but it wasn't a good diagnosis to say the least. So here I am, 31 years old. I've got a baby on the way, and I had a lot on my plate. So that was the beginning of my challenge. And, for the next 6 years, or the following 6 years, my challenge was, how do I care for my husband who's progressively, his illness is getting worse and worse. We had another son, so I had 2 boys. I was trying to balance a career, and I was crazy for this, but I even started a business in there as well. So for 6 years, I was climbing this mountain and trying to manage. So I'm sure a lot of you can relate to whatever challenge you had and how you faced it. And so there were lots of ups and downs for sure through that challenge. And I guess that you, or I'm going to guess that all of you can think of your ups and downs as well. One thing that I realized though through my challenge was that in amongst all that frustration, all that unhappiness, you really can find happiness. And so people, when I talk about this experience, they're like, how could you even find happiness in all of that? But we did. We found a lot of happiness. And how, you might be asking how I did that. And I want to share with you, there were 4 elements that I took away from that experience. So this is me here, the little happy face in the middle. And I want you to think of your challenge and yourself there. So one of the key things I learned as I went through my challenge with Paul's illness was not to keep myself separate, that connecting to other people was really, really important. And that can be hard when you feel like you're facing this uphill challenge to really get out there and connect. So I learned that connection was key. When you're 31 years old, starting a new family, starting a career, there weren't a lot of people in my immediate circle who wanted to talk about cancer or wanted to talk about that type of challenge that we were facing. I quickly learned once I got out of my own little world that leveraging all of these connections and collaborating with them was a way to help us get through our challenge as well. And as you think of your own challenge, think of those different people or groups that you were able to tap into and collaborate and use their expertise. The other part that I learned through these 6 years is the need to be agile. And I know that word is used a lot, and I just realized there's a typo there. That's good, we're all human, right? Is this need to be agile. And you know, for 6 years, Paul lived with this illness, and we quickly learned after the first 2 years, we were never gonna get that diagnosis or that prognosis that said, oh, it's cured, it's all good. So we learned to live literally by 3 months, every 3 months, and we didn't let our plans for life get in the way. So we learned to be agile and adapt, and we would still plan for trips, we'd still plan to do things with the boys, and if he had treatment in between there, we would just deal with it. So this concept of agility was really, really important. And then the last thing that I learned was this notion of equivalence. And there's two things here. Equivalence in that there are all these people that can help you, all these people in your system. So that circle there is the system. And they're all there. They all have an equivalent piece to play in overcoming your challenge. So really what I learned out of all of this was that when you realize how you can overcome your personal challenges, you can actually take that and package it and take it into the workplace. And so a few years after Paul passed away, you know, those 4 things were very prevalent in my head. I thought, well, let's just move that into the workplace, and let's think about creating experiences for people. And so that's really how the Purposeful Workplace Experience was born in my head. And I wrote that book, Rules of Engagement, where I introduced it and talked about those 4 elements of what I call PWE. Now, I think we can all agree that the workplace challenges that we are facing are not small. They are really, really significant. So, you know, we know chronic stress, we all see it, we all feel it. I don't think anybody's immune from it. You know, right now, chronic stress is causing our workforce, well, the US workforce, $190 billion. We also know that loneliness is something that is becoming very, very prevalent in the workplace. And in fact, in a recent study, 85% of people said they felt lonely at work. Like, wow, that's kind of frightening, right? You've got all these people you're working with, but yet 85% feel that they're lonely. And then, of course, we are having to deal with a mental health crisis in our society, and that's obviously showing up in our workplace as well. And if you look at Canada alone, you know, 500,000 Canadians in any given week are unable to work because of mental health concerns. So we really, really have a challenge on our hands. And this year, this blew me away when this came out, when the World Health Organization recognized burnout as a chronic medical condition. Now, I don't know about any of you out there, but I did. I burnt out. I burnt out 2 years into Paul's illness, and I thought it was just a normal thing. So when Rob talks about passion, you know, my passion for this really lights up, because I don't want to see what happened to me and what is happening to many others around us burn out at their job, because there's so much that we can do in our work to help the world become a better place.
Carolyn, out of curiosity, I'm wondering, like, how do they define burnouts? Like, you know, it's a concept I understand at a high level, but is there a definition of what burnout really is, or what that means, or someone can self-identify and say, yeah, that actually, I'm kind of there?
Yeah, that's a good question. I don't know exactly what the World Health recognized or what they termed it at. I'll tell you what, like, my burnout involved. I got diagnosed with clinical depression, and so this inability to make decisions, to think clearly, to not be able to perform like day-to-day activities and really like manage my ability to look after home and look after work and not feel overwhelmed and stressed. How would you define it?
Similarly, I mean, in terms of just feeling like you can't succeed at the things that matter to your life because you feel there's some blockage there. And typically, sometimes that's mental, but sometimes it's just physically exhaustion. Like you've pushed yourself to a point where you can't do the things that you want to do or the things that must happen for, kind of a fulfillful life. But that's why I'm going to look it up as well. I just wonder if you had any context to that. And I might add, Carol, I know there's a lot of vulnerability in telling those stories and sharing those. So, I mean, that's really appreciated. I'm sure not on my side, but everyone on the call. And there were a couple of folks, Sue and Halima, who'd mentioned some of the things they were going through and challenges as well. And actually, Pat just wrote something on the webinar right now that said, according to the World Health Organization, burnout is characterized by feelings of energy depletion or exhaustion, increased mental distance from one's job, or feelings of negativism or cynicism related to one's job, and reduced professional efficiency. Thanks so much, Pat.
Yeah, thanks, Pat. And I mean, certainly, I think many of us can relate to feeling that at one time or another. And how do we make sure that that doesn't continue, right? We're going to have our bad days, but when it continues day after day and year after year, that's no good for anybody.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. So we know that there's a challenge and we're facing it every day. I also thought it was important to share and look at the Gallup engagement results. And I always find this really interesting. If we look over the past, almost 20 years, we see some modest changes. So what you see here on the screen, the lighter green color, percentage of engaged people in the workforce. And that's how they're identifying. The darker colored green, or teal, I guess, those are actively disengaged. And so, there's a few things that strike me about this slide. One is the percentage changes a little bit. I mean, I think it goes from like 26 to 34. So yes, there certainly has been an uptick the past few years, and that's great. But for the most part, it hasn't really changed. So why? Why hasn't it changed? So much has changed in our workplace, how we work, who we're working with. Diversity and inclusion is becoming much more top of mind and integrated into how we work. So why haven't engagement rates changed? The other thing that strikes me in this is, well, what about those 53% in the middle? What about those who aren't engaged or those who aren't actively disengaged? There's 53% in the middle. So when I look at that, I think, maybe there's a mindset. Maybe there's a different way to look at things. And so in my mind, there's a real shift from this notion of let's engage people. And having worked, in all honesty, in a leadership position for many years, where that was, written on my development plan, make sure you engage your team and achieve an engagement rate. And I'm not saying that was wrong. It was what we did at the time, and I think it was good. It was part of the evolution. And what I'm suggesting is, how can we shift from engaging people to inspiring them? And how we can inspire them is to create experiences. And so if I come back to, my experience with my husband and his illness, I didn't have control over the cancer. I didn't have control over the system, but I could create experiences for our young family that would create some happiness. And that's what I did. That's what I focused on. And so, bringing that into work is where I really made that shift from engaging the people that I worked with to inspiring them and creating an experience for them to thrive. So if we look at the workplace, we might be thinking, well, okay, that sounds great, Carolyn, but is it really, really feasible? Well, there's something here that I want to share. Two things that I want to share that I believe now is the best time to be doing this, to make this shift. First of all, the notion of the hierarchy and the more, the structures that we've been used to in the past in our organizations that have been much more top down. that's really starting to shift. So we're seeing an emergence of more self-managed organizations. So for those of you who know spiral dynamics, there's, teal organizations who really revolve around self-managed teams. We also know that in the workplace, 90% of workers are part of at least one cross-functional team. And in fact, 73% of those people are involved in 2 cross-functional teams. So I like to say move over hierarchy. This idea of teams and the power of teams is really, really coming to light. And traditionally, we've heard a lot of people say, well, CEOs determine the culture of an organization. I'm here to tell you, let's not wait for the CEO to tell us what to do. Let's create the culture. Let's create these experiences in the teams that we're working with. And for any of you who are organizational development geeks or organizational culture geeks like me, Ed Schein is our hero in this space. He's an MIT professor. He's been doing this work for, I think he's 92. I don't know, Rob, if you know how old he is off the top. And I heard him on a podcast last September, actually it was a year ago, and he said, and so this is from the individual, the man who said, culture starts from the top and goes down. And last year he said, groups that develop their own cultures might be more important than the big corporate culture. So we're seeing a real shift here. And my passion, my belief, and what I want to continue speaking about is, let's not wait for the CEO to tell us what the culture should be. Can they influence it? Yes, they can. But the CEO doesn't sit beside you and your team every single day. So you can create the experience, you can create the environment for you and your teams to thrive within. Rob, you look like you're thinking. Are you about to throw a question my way?
Yeah, I don't want to throw you off, but I guess, I guess that's the concept of creating a culture, right? A lot of what you think about is you can't just define a culture. You can't say this is going to be the culture of the organization, but it's kind of the environment you build that kind of the product of that becomes the culture of the organization, whether those are the rituals you have in the organizations, the way you communicate, kind of the cues that are developed. So I guess when I hear the concept of let's create a culture, it's this kind of sub-intentional thing that happens as opposed to where this is the culture and what we need to follow. It's kind of a product of an environment you create. So I always struggle with the definition when you say, okay, how do we create a culture? Maybe you're going to talk about it a little further, but that's kind of where my mind is at.
Yeah, well, and it's a good point. Create, we don't just create it. So many things go into it. I like to use the word evolve. How can we evolve how we work, the culture, to something that inspires us and motivates us, and instead of feeling like it has to be done to us.
Yeah, and this is actually, as soon as you were saying that, Michael just wrote and said, can you address creating a culture shift in existing company organizations? So it's kind of that evolution. So I'm not sure if that's something you will get into as opposed to creation. And there's always some culture, I guess, at the end of the day that needs to be evolved. But any comments to what Michael was mentioning there?
Yeah, no, it's a great point. Thanks, Michael. It's really, it really is about culture evolution, because there's so many pieces that go into an organizational culture. And so, and legacy is a part of that, right? So whatever's happened before you even got there, we can't forget that. We can't let it go, those artifacts. So think of it as evolving. How can you evolve your team? How can you evolve the environment within which you work? And what I'm saying is PWE, Purposeful Workplace Experience, it really helps shift you to become an active creator or an active evolver and a catalyst to move that culture to something that inspires. Yeah, does that make sense? And Michael, does that answer your question?
Michael's feverishly typing probably. We just can't see yet.
Little dots. The 4 elements of PWE, if I come back again to my personal experience, and I'm hoping that you were able to connect with your own personal experience and those ideas of connection, collaborating, agility, and equivalence. I want to share with you now what that looks like in the workplace, because those are 4 fundamental aspects to creating a PWE. So let's start first with connection. And this is a word that, you know, you hear people talk about it a lot. It also elicits not only a human connection, but it also elicits thoughts of a technological connection. And so when I talk about connection here in the way of a purposeful workplace experience, I'm talking about human connection. I'm talking about prioritizing relationships, creating a sense of belonging, and really making that a priority and not letting this worry about time get in our way. And some people, I hear this quite often actually from clients that I work with is, well, we're connecting. I've got an open door policy. Like, people can come connect with me whenever they want. So you might think that it's already happening, but it might not be happening as much as you want. And for those of you who are fans of Brene Brown, I'm a big one. She talks in her book, Dare to Lead, about the fact that we've confused, I think it was Dare to Lead or maybe Daring Greatly, we've confused communication with connecting. So if you're like me, you're sitting there on Slack or you're texting or you're using Microsoft Teams, it's easy to think that you're connecting with your teammates and you're getting work done. What I'm challenging us to think is, let's take it one step further. In fact, we have to take it one step further, because that virtual connection isn't doing enough for us on a human level. So what connection looks like in a purposeful workplace experience, it looks like building trust through moments. And what I mean by that is, you know, stopping to talk to people, stopping to connect on a personal human level. I'll give you an example. I work with some amazing folks at One Degree, and at the beginning of all of our meetings, we always do a check-in. How's everybody feeling? What's one word to describe the energy you're bringing in? That's what I mean about building trust through moments. There's that human connection. And then we get into the work and we go from there. The other part of this is leaning into tough conversations. It's not easy to do, and that would be a whole other webinar on its own. But this idea of leaning into tough conversations, respecting the fact that we're going to have differences, but I'm going to respect you enough, and I'm going to have built up enough trust through these moments with you to have some of these tougher conversations and work through some of the challenges that we're facing in the business. And then last but not least, so important, we all lead busy lives, and it can be really easy to make it through the day and not say thank you to somebody. So thank you, Rob and Stephen, for inviting me on. That's another example of just a little moment. So why don't I stop there? Any questions about this notion of connection, or Rob, anything that came to mind for you when I went through that?
Yeah, I mean, one thing early in my career that was said to me was that I try to take into every conversation, especially in the workplace, is the concept of being completely present. Like you said, it's actually like everything else gets aside. You're leaning in, that concept. So I think that really resonates with an individual. But I also, this morning I had coffee with a remote working consultant, helping organizations talk about, now 60% of your workforce is remote. And do you find that this is becoming more challenging with the technology component? Do you see companies still making those efforts? Any thoughts on the kind of remote worker kind of component to this?
I think it's IBM. Somebody else might correct me, but I believe it's IBM that has shifted their stance on remote offices now, and they're now requiring their employees to come into the office for this whole reason of connection and being around. So, I'm not saying, hey, we've got to all go back into offices now. As somebody who does a lot of remote work, I really appreciate that flexibility. I do make a more concerted effort now, though, to reach out and connect by phone. So one of my colleagues at One Degree today, she sent me an email. I was going to send it back, and I just picked up the phone and chatted with her for 15 minutes, as opposed to. So that would be one way I'd say from a remote perspective. Pick up the phone. We've got Zoom. We've got other video technologies that we can leverage now.
I'm laughing because my team is so sick of me having everything on camera, whether I'm walking down the street or like this, but it does kind of build that connection. Now, there was a comment, and I don't know if it was a comment or an affirmation or a question. All it says is the difference between connection and collaboration. If you can give any additional color there, please. I'd love to know if that's a question or if you're just saying that there is a difference between it, or you're asking Carolyn for her thoughts. But
Well, it's a good segue because I was going to head right into collaboration.
Love it. Let's do it.
Yeah, they're two different things. And in fact, you need connection. Connection is the foundation. I mean, relationships are the currency that is going to drive your organization. So once you have your connection, you can then lean into collaboration and really leverage it. So when I say collaboration in PWE, what I mean is focusing on the group effectiveness, and doing that, you can leverage strengths, you can be more diverse, and build that interdependency between teams. And when we build that interdependency between teams, it fuels performance collectively versus competition. Now, having grown up in the pharma industry and in sales for many years, and winning several awards, I have to say I love competition. And from an athletic perspective, competition is part of being an athlete. What I'm saying here is that competition doesn't need to be everywhere, and it still exists in a lot of workplaces, and it really, really does not serve our organizations the same way that it used to. So this idea of collaboration is, I think, really interestingly demonstrated through these two concepts here. Has anybody heard of Project Aristotle? It came out of Google when they were studying teams. Rob, you're nodding your head. What do you remember from that? Anything you remember in particular out of that study?
I'm mixing up the rework stuff with Aristotle, so I'm gonna bow out of this one because I'm not 100% sure which one's which, but I'm familiar of the concept.
Yeah, so Project Aristotle was a project that Google ran, and they wanted to understand what made a perfect performer and what made teams really, really successful. The interesting thing that came back out of this work, and I won't get into it, I'm just giving you the headlines from it, was that there actually is no perfect performer within a team. And teams that were really successful were high in two areas. One, they had high social sensitivity. So that's a strong awareness of the social connections around them. So that was the first thing. The other thing about these high performing teams was that each team, the successful teams, cultivated a space where everybody spoke equally. So this notion that everybody plays a role. So those were the two factors that were the foundation for these excellent teams. It's a little bit counterintuitive to what many of us have risen through the ranks or in the workforce, where we think it's all about the superstar, right? We think about, I mean, I love the Raptors, I'm a big Raptor fan, but you think about how the Raptors were able to win that NBA championship. Was Kawhi Leonard a big part of it? Yeah, he was, but it was the team that did all the work collectively. And so Project Aristotle was really one of the first examples where we had evidence to support this notion that it's not just all about the superstar. I'm hoping that rings a bell for those of you out there who've heard that. Another interesting, I wrote about this in the book, Super Chickens. It's just, it's funny. I just thought it was really hilarious when I read about this, but it also goes to show you the power of creating a team and not a bunch of individual superstars. So if you have the chance, go have a look at the TED Talk. It's by Margaret Heffernan, and she talks about the Super Chickens story. You're smiling, Rob. Do you remember seeing that one or ringing a bell?
No, I just like the word super chickens.
Yeah. I don't actually know if that's a super chicken there, but yeah, have a look at it when you're walking home, maybe. Or yeah. So this super chicken talk was, as I said, pretty hilarious. And so Margaret talked about this experiment that was done to breed super chickens. And so the idea was that if you could get some of those high performing egg layers to get even, lay even more eggs, that producers could have all these super chickens, they'd lay more eggs and make more money, and all would be great. So the breeder put two groups together, a group of average egg layers and then had these top performing egg layers, and repeated that process for 6 successive generations. And I don't know how long a generation is for chickens, but it was for 6 chicken generations. Now, what do you think might have happened? I mean, you haven't heard the super chicken story. It's easy to think that, well, those super chickens overproduced and boom, you had all these, way more eggs and the super chickens win. What actually happened is that average group continued to produce. So they consistently produced, and what ended up happening is the super chickens started to peck each other to death. They actually started eliminating each other from laying eggs. So again, another interesting story to show the power of the team and making sure that you look at the collective and create an experience for everybody, not just the top performers or the super chickens. So a few of the techniques to just start give you some food for thought that you can look into after the call, or if you want to follow up with me, I'd be happy to share that. But here are some things that we talk about in our work. I work with as I said earlier, a group of great people from One Degree, and so this is a lot of what we do in our work at One Degree. So how can you be more collaborative? Look at how your meetings are running. Are you giving space for everybody to speak? And there's some really easy techniques to do that so that it's not just the loudest voice in the room. How are you using decision-making methods? So quite often we see a lot of consensus-based or autocratic decision-making. Well, there's a technique of consent-based decision-making, which is another way to make sure everybody gets a voice in what's going on, and another way to leverage everybody's insights and opinions are in the room. I'm a big fan of whiteboards, and in my book I talk a lot about one of my former colleagues who was brilliant at drawing out what she sees. So, just getting up and illustrating, and getting people aligned on the concepts by drawing them out. The last 2 items here, paint done for me. As I mentioned earlier, I'm a big Brene fan, and this is one of her methods, which is paint done for me. So Rob, if you and I were working on a project together and you said, okay, Carolyn, I need you to go do this. I'd be like, okay, Rob, paint done for me. What does it look like? So get that clarity on exactly what it is you're thinking. And so using that as well can really help. And then last but not least, rewarding team performance versus individual performance. Easier said than done, I know, but we are definitely seeing a shift of organizations moving towards that and looking at team-based incentive versus individual incentives.
Yeah, I love that. One concept I've always used with teams and at the company is always what does success look like? So similarly, paint done, like, we can never get to success unless we have complete understanding or alignment on what that is. So I haven't heard the concept. Paint done for me is a much better marketing spin on it than I have. Yeah. And one thing and just kind of context, one thing I've been doing for many years now, kind of a decade and a half, is this concept called brutal facts. If anyone's familiar with Good to Great, pardon me?
Jim Collins?
Yes, it was escaping me, thank you. He had this concept called brutal facts, and one of the ways that they went about it was they had employees in an organization say, what were the brutal facts this quarter? And sometimes they ask that explicitly, or a lot of work I do with companies is getting that through employee feedback. And what we do is we actually put it all on a board and we say, as an employee base, what do you think are the biggest brutal facts? So it becomes this effort in prioritizing as an organization and employees, not just leaders, of where the bigger brutal facts are. And then you dig into those, and then they're part of not only telling you what's wrong with the company, but what we call participative management, right? Mm-hmm. What should we be doing differently? Kind of not the what's wrong, but what we would do about it, how would we fix it? And that concept of everyone speaks, there's a lot of kind of decision-making based on what other people think, not just at a leadership level, I found has been a really great collaboration tool that, again, they're part of the process. So that's just another story I thought I'd share.
Yeah. One more thing I'll add about collaboration too, because I know it's a big buzzword, and what we can see happen often is collaboration means picking one person from each department and putting everyone in a meeting room together. that's not, like, we can move, we can evolve that. We can evolve that to getting everybody to speak. It's not about putting people in a room and saying, this is what we're going to do, everyone. It's giving everyone space to speak. And that takes time. And it does take a noted, deliberate effort to run your meetings differently.
Cool. Before we move on, Carolyn, there was a question that came in about performance and high performers. And also there's a couple other folks that I haven't found the right time to throw that question in, but we will get to it at the end for sure. But Bridget said, would you say a pay for performance, like higher bonus for high performance, is an example of focusing on high performers? And I'm not sure if any thoughts on that.
Yeah. I mean, a pay for performance, we're used to that. And I do, you know, in sales especially, right? You pay, you earn more if you can sell more. I think there are certain environments where that is important. I think idealistically, if we could move away from and look more to a collective approach, you're going to see a bigger buy-in. You're going to see a bigger commitment to an organization in the long run.
Fair enough. Yeah, some departments it's really hard because it's really hard to measure performance at an individual level, for example, versus group. But that's always a challenge in the whole performance management and kind of process around establishing KPIs, et cetera.
Yeah, and I mean, if you look at, instead of having individual goals, maybe, you know, can you shift to having team goals, and can you create those goals together? And how can we help each other with our goals? Yeah.
Thanks.
Hope that answered your question, Bridget. It's a tough one. It's a tough one. Having lived so many years in sales, I certainly can appreciate the transition away from individual performance. So agility, again, a word that's used a lot, and it's spelled right here too. So this idea of agility is certainly not new. We hear it talked about a lot. And when I talked about my own personal experience, this was a really transformative idea for me. You know, this idea of expecting change, embracing the fast pace, iterating, prototyping, and accepting that mistakes will be made. You know, I think the best story that really helped me in my own leadership in the workplace was, you know, Paul had CAT scans or MRIs done every 3 months to monitor how his disease was progressing. And we started living, and I didn't even realize it at the time because it's not like my personal life was built out in quarters or financial quarters. But what I realized is we were living quarter to quarter. And so the direct translation, here's what I ended up doing. I realized, well, yeah, you can plan for your quarter. So, you know, he would have his CT scan or his MRI. Sometimes it would be great. It'd be like, wow, the cancer didn't grow. Great. Other times it was like, yeah, it did grow. So we learned literally to live quarter to quarter. And I took that back into the workplace when it came to planning. So doing our tactical planning and then also doing our personal development plans. And I said to the teams that I was leading, okay, we're just going to build out. We know what our strategy is. We're going to build out a solid plan for the next quarter, have an idea about the following quarters, but we're going to be really focused on this quarter. And I did the same thing for personal development plans. And it was hard for them. I remember one individual, he said, well, what do you mean? Like, we have to put the whole thing in. Somebody's going to look at this and we're going to get in trouble. And I said, no, don't you worry about that. We're going to be real here. And we're only going to plan for your personal development in this quarter because that's all we know right now. So that's one aspect of agility. The other aspect of agility is this idea of learning from failure. And again, another thing that's easier said than done. Here's an example that I used with my team to really help people feel comfortable with this mindset of failure. At the beginning of every week, we'd have a weekly huddle, and I'd ask people to bring an example of something that did not go as planned the week before. So I started not using the word failure because I think there's some mental blocks that we have around that. And I would say, hey, Rob, what happened last week that didn't go as planned? I don't know if you can think of something right now. We could do a real live moment piece. But is there something when you think of last week that didn't really go as planned?
Yeah, well, I guess maybe not as planned. We ended up losing a deal that we thought we were going to have, as an example.
So what's your learning? What did you learn from that experience, Rob?
Yeah, I mean, still to be determined. We need to have conversations, find out what the case was, why we weren't selected, those type of things. But it's actually very similar. We do a retrospective every week in the whole organization. To your point, what went well, what didn't. More importantly, what do we can do differently?
Right. And so you can take that. So I would say personally, and we don't have to continue the conversation directly, but it was really digging into, so Rob, what did you personally learn from last week? And how can you, or what are you going to do with that moving forward? So now that you know that, what are you going to do next week that might be different? And we actually tracked them in just a sheet. We wrote it right up on a whiteboard, and it became a way of us all learning from each other. So this idea that for us to be agile, it was okay to admit that things weren't always going to go the way that we wanted them to. So that's another great thing. I'll do one more plug here for a new toy that's coming out through 21 Toys, which is a local Toronto business. And they are launching something called the Failure Toy. So I would encourage you to go have a look at it. And it's something that I hope to be able to start using soon with my clients. But it's, again, another way to help us embrace this mindset of agility so that we don't get set back when failure happens, but instead we can use it to move forward. The last piece of PWE, and I'm sure by now you're realizing like, wow, it's like not rocket science. But what I found is when you can think of these 4 things and keep them top of mind, it will allow you to create these experiences within your team, and therefore impact the greater culture that you work within. So this notion that we work within is really important, right? I worked in a large organization. It was a global organization. And so there were times where it was like, oh, I can't change everything. It's easy to give up. And so this quote by Barack Obama really, really hit me when I read it. You know, he was reflecting on his presidency and he said, you know, you can't change a system overnight. And you can't, especially if you work in a big organization. But what you can do is you can make incremental steps. And so this last idea of equivalence is really about understanding that you work within a system, but not getting hung up on all the job titles within it, and recognizing that you can do some things within the system to make things better. This idea that everyone plays a role, everyone has unique contributions, and it's not about the hierarchy. So, you know, if I come back to an example on one of the teams that I worked with, we all had different titles and we were across 4 different pay grades. But I worked really hard to separate those titles, actually remove the titles, and make it clear how every single person contributed to our results. So we were all equivalent in finding the solutions or creating or meeting our goals and creating solutions. So this idea of promoting accountability individually can help decentralize all of the decisions landing on one person. So that's the last piece of equivalence. Again, this mindset that everybody's equal, everyone contributes to the way forward, and that when you have that mindset, you won't get overtaken by this system that feels like it might eat you all up.
How would you like really, I mean, understanding that the concept of equality is there, but the decision's likely landing on someone who to make that decision. Like, how do you build that level of alignment at a team level? How do you communicate that? How do you, because I mean, at the end of the day, like someone's going to make that call, or do you see people like structure saying we're going to make collective decisions? I just want to dig a little deeper.
Yeah, definitely seeing structures in these teams. Like as we move to more team-based organizations and in something like a teal organization, absolutely teams are making these decisions together and they're making them collectively. And there's not one person from the top down telling them.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
I just saw something pop up from Steven, said, just heard from a person in a 700-person company that every employee is referred to as contributor, which I really like.
Yes, that's beautiful. Yep.
Cool.
Yep.
Thanks for sharing.
Yeah. So, I mean, really, what I am so passionate about is that, you know, it starts with you and your team, and I personally empowered by my own individual experience and my own challenges that I've overcome. I hope all of you out there, when you think of your own personal experiences and the challenges that you've overcome, that you've been able to connect with, you know, some of these aspects of PWE, and that you can take those into your own workplace. You can create an environment with your team that can inspire. Every little bit counts, and you can take those happy moments, and those happy moments that you have with your team absolutely will reflect upon your customers. They'll see it, they will feel it, and it will make you know, it'll make a big difference. This is just, you know, just to close off, these are the 4 elements again: creating those meaningful connections, collaborating instead of competing, having that agile mindset, and recognizing unique contribution. If you can, as you keep your eye on those 4 things, you absolutely will impact the people around you and create that experience. Rob, I think it's a good for me to point out at this point. One of the reasons why I reached out to you and why I was so enamored with what WorkTango does is that it appeared to me, this was before I met you and knew more about your tool, but this idea of understanding experiences, WorkTango does such a good job at doing that. It's not about a formalized engagement survey. I just love the flexibility of the WorkTango tool to help create this dialogue and understand the experience that contributors, that people in the organization are having.
Yeah, no, and I appreciate that. I think that's the idea of the way organizations connected with people is typically once a year, pretty infrequent. It's hard to be agile and create meaningful connections and really collaborate without that level of input and feedback, and making it easier. So it's obviously something that we focus on. But no, I appreciate the walking us through this today, Carolyn. You know, we mentioned we want to leave some time for questions. There's a few here that came up, but again, if anyone else has any more, you know, we'll spend the next 9-10 minutes walking through them. And one of the questions was earlier from Stephen, who just gave us the great idea about a contributor versus an employee. And I think it gets back to the culture conversation earlier, but it says, but doesn't change begin with cognitive dissonance? So how does a team interject that against a different company culture that is not working well?
So how does a team interject that? So say that again, I'm not clear on what the question is.
Yeah, how does a team interject cognitive dissonance, I'm assuming, against a different company culture that is not working well? So I guess, and I'm not sure, maybe Stephen can add a little color there, but I now that I read it out loud, I'm not 100% sure exactly where he's going there.
Yeah, I mean, what's coming up for me is like, what do you do when the rest of your organizational culture isn't aligned with what you're trying to do in your own smaller subculture in your team? And there could be a dissonance, and I certainly can relate to that. That's where I'd say, listen, you can't boil the ocean. You focus on what you have control over, and that's you and your team. And really do focus on that and recognize where you can get those wins and you can progress, and recognize and identify where you might meet a bit of that resistance.
Okay. There were 2 questions here, kind of similar. One from Lori said, it's definitely a difficult challenge to connect with coworkers when you work from home. You can't meet with them or chat with them or build the connection without the social media options. Any suggestions to be able to achieve this for work from home folks? And then Nikki similarly said thoughts on how to connect with staff who are not geographically located on a single work site. So 70% of staff are offsite all across Ontario. So I know we had some ideas earlier, but any other color to add there that might want to give any suggestions?
Yep. So for part of my career, I was a sales manager in Saskatchewan. And for any of you who have lived in Saskatchewan, you know it's very large and remote. I had a team of 12 people. So getting around to all of them was really hard. I made a very strong effort to talk to them on the phone at the beginning and the end of almost every second day. So it was just checking in like, hey, what's your day look like? What can I help you out with today? What are you working on? What's your biggest challenge today? Call me at the end of the day and let me know how it goes. Or send me a text and let me know how it goes. And that's something, again, you're not looking to check in on them in a task. It's like, hey, I'm here for you. What are you working on today? How are you feeling today? And you know, you can do that with anyone globally. Don't underestimate how much the person will feel that connection by doing that. So that would be one thing. You know, picking up the phone, texting can certainly help with that connection. You know, schedule time. I used to schedule 1 hour a month with all my direct reports, or, you know, people who reported into me. And I said, that's your hour. You choose how you want that to go. You know, it then turned into half an hour as my team got larger, but giving them the chance to determine what that time looks like.
Yeah, I think it's always been like just making time for those one-on-one conversations, making it their meeting about them and progression, not about checkups, and making sure we're looking at goals and things like that. Obviously helps that connection as well. And I'm not sure if Kate, looks like Kate was kind of helping support an idea for some of those questions you mentioned. I have work from home folks. We record all huddles, frequent MS Teams face-to-face meetings, very effective at promoting engagement. So so thanks, Kate, especially with a lot of those work from home folks.
Yeah, actually, that reminds me, we used to have our weekly huddle, and we would transfer somebody in by just holding the phone up and showing them. So, I mean, it was virtual. It was fun, but it made them feel more connected.
Very cool. I've also, every time we have, because we're in 3 different cities at WorkTango, we always try and start with the people on the phone first, right? Like start with them. Sometimes they just get forgotten, and I find that's a really good way to build a culture around simple things, just as meetings with remote folks.
Yeah.
There was one quick question. Oh, sorry, go on, Carolyn.
I was going to say too, you know, these notions of barbecues and doing things collectively, hey, those are really, really important, and I'm not saying they should go away. It's an and. So how can you create those like individual connections, even if you walked a long way to get into your office, or, you know, stop by a different department. This VP of finance we used to work with, I mean, finance people they weren't necessarily the people you would expect to walk through all of the areas of the office, but he would walk through and talk to everybody. Hey, what concert are you going to? What's your favorite music? And so when he got up to deliver the financials, it was an exciting time because he built all these little moments of trust with everybody in the company.
Cool. There's one quick question. Anonymous, didn't catch the name of the person TED Talk on chickens.
Oh, Margaret Heffernan. Heffernan. Just, yeah, Google super chicken.
Yeah, there's a lot of things that come up when you Google super chicken. So a question came really early on in the conversation and the culture discussion, and it said, any thoughts on ways to create this environment and purposeful workplace after something has happened, like workplace harassment or an investigation? Like, how do you restore it? Like, is there anything based on, you know, more of a challenging experience versus getting into that next level?
Yeah. I mean, it's a great question, and it's real, right? We have a lot of real stuff happening out there. You know, as much as we can be authentic and come into these conversations, knowing that we don't have all the answers, and acknowledging that, you know, that it might be a little bit, I'll say, uncomfortable, but, you know, if I was in that situation, I would be really real and say, hey, what can I do to support, or how can we move forward? Like, just create an honest dialogue and recognize that you might not say all the right things, but that if you can be vulnerable enough and let yourself be human in that conversation and ask them on how you can do it together, you'll be able to move forward and push through it.
Yeah. I heard this comment once, and I wish I could find it or where it came from. But the idea was there's 2 layers of trust. You're either building it or you're eroding it. Like, there's no in between. Yeah. So I find that even in those situations where trust might be lost, or that challenging situation, just, you know, in that question, there's nothing else you can do other than start building trust again, right? Yeah. Like, start building that, continuing the journey, these 4 elements involved. And I find that when you focus on that versus, you know, put it this way, you can't just let it be. Because there's no purgatory or middle ground. Like, you're building or eroding it. So if you're not building it, it's continuing to erode as time goes on.
And let's face it, there are a lot of conversations that aren't happening in the workplace. So if you can just lean in the more you lean in, the more you try to have those difficult conversations, the easier it's going to get. Right?
Mm-hmm.
This living in with that uncertainty is might not always feel comfortable, but it does get a little bit easier.
Gotcha. My gosh, I just realized we have less than a minute left. Looks like we're out of time today. What I did want to do just before kind of saying goodbye to everyone is just a heads up that on the WorkTango website, we do these webinars every 3 to 4 weeks. Take a look, see if there's anything above and beyond webinars that you might find. And maybe if this is your first time attending a webinar series with us, there's many of ones in the past you might find interest in. But the fact that we do have one more minute. Oh no, just returned to 2 o'clock. But let's do it anyways. There's still like 93 people on. There's a question here from Diane that says, how do you transition from individual to team performance? So I'll just throw that out there and see what you got, Carolyn.
I'd say, Diane, link with me on LinkedIn. Yeah, it's definitely, it's something that you have to give some good thought to, because if you just flip from individual to team performance and don't include people on that journey, you'll get a lot of resistance and unhappy people. But seriously, feel free to reach out. And I was gonna say, I'm happy to connect with anybody. If you wanted to do just a complimentary 15-minute consult, reach out to me on LinkedIn. I'd be happy to do that with you. And I also have a podcast, PWE and Me, and I'm always looking for stories of what people are doing. I'm going to guess a lot of you are doing a lot to create a purposeful workplace experience right now, and I'd love to hear your story as well. So feel free to reach out and connect with me on LinkedIn, and we'll make that happen. We'll get you on the podcast. And Rob, you're going to be a guest shortly, I hope, on my podcast too.
Let me know. Happy to do it. And again, thank you everyone for attending. My apologies. There seems to be a number of other questions we just unfortunately didn't have time to get to. Hopefully we'll have Carolyn back at one point, or, I know Carolyn personally enough, you can reach out to her and I'm sure she'll be willing to give you some additional insight as well. But thank you again for attending. Much appreciated, and hope everyone has a good rest of the day and week here. Take care, everyone.
See you later.